Aiden Brody wore 3 years living alone in a wooden cabin in the depths of the mountains Adirondack. A former national network reporter, he had retired from the world after the sudden death of his wife, seeking silence where there was once noise, calm where there was once deadlines and interviews. Your days were simple, firewood for the morning, clumsy typing on an old typewriter in the afternoon, and long walks among the pines in the fall, the sun. I wasn't looking for inspiration. I was looking for consolation. What I didn't know was that tranquility, self-imposed, was about to break in the most unexpected way. It was one morning cold of April when opened the door, as always did, with the cup of coffee still smoky in the hand. But what he found on the other side had no place in your routine nor in his comprehension. In his porch, just a few steps away, a huge black bear observed silent. He didn't growl, neither showed the teeth. I was just there, trembling slightly, with he tangled and wet fur in some parts, as if I had crossed a choppy river or survived a brutal fight. Aiden froze. The coffee slipped from his hands and spilled without him. You will notice it. In the mouth, the bear held with delicacy the flaccid body of a bear cub, which hung like a broken doll. But what most impacted were the eyes of the animal. Large, wet, sad. There was no threat in them, just a silent, almost human plea against all logic, against every instinct of self-preservation. Aiden gave a pass forward, not knowing if he was about to die or start something that would change your life forever. If you ever felt that life changed you with a small gesture, this may be the time to share this story. There was no roar, nor flight, nor attack. The bear, seeing Aiden approaching slowly, stopped carefully, placed the puppy on the wooden floor, and stepped back a few steps, as if he understood that his presence could scare him more than a count. Aiden, with his heart beating in the ears, knelt down next to the bear cub. He was warm but motionless. His chest barely moved, and his legs dangled without force. The journalist turned into hermit knew nothing about animal medicine, but he did recognize the language of the suffering. With great care, he took the little one in his arms, wrapped on a blanket that was there left next to the chimney, and it took him inside his house, leaving the door ajar in case the mother decided follow. Him? Don't do it, did. He stayed there, sitting like a living statue, watchful and sad, while the snow was beginning to fall in silence. Within the cabin, Aiden improvised a shelter with blankets, a portable heater, and a water bottle hot. There was read that the honey could help in cases of weakness, so dissolved a little in water warm, and with a syringe tried make the bear cub the drink. At first, there was none answer. Aiden spoke in a low voice, as if he could convince the little one to cling to life just by words. "Hang in there, champ," he muttered, not knowing why I felt so much for an animal I had just met. Hours passed like this, between failed attempts and hopes fragile. At dusk, the bear cub, he moved one of his front legs, just a little, shaking, but enough for Aiden felt a knot in the throat, then opened an eye. It was there when, without think about it, put name, Baxter. Baxter did not recover immediately. His first days were a seesaw of slow progress and alarming setbacks. Aiden I slept little, always with an eye open and an ear attentive to any changes in the breathing of the bear cub. He had become, without plan it, in your caregiver, your nurse, her only support. Outside, the mother remained close, although without get closer from the edge of the forest. Every morning appeared and lay down on the snow, looking in direction to the cabin. It never emitted a sound, as if he knew that any interruption could break the fragile balance. Aiden, increasingly connected with that silent presence, left food scraps near a tree, and him spoke from time to time when from afar. I didn't know if I understood, but I felt that there was something between them that went beyond of the language. With he, as the weeks passed, Baxter began to walk again, clumsily at first, stumbling with hind legs, but with a determination that was moving. He played with a sock old. He bit the legs of the table, and sometimes he would fall asleep on Aiden's feet, as if he had born for it. Aiden, for his part, had stopped writing completely. His days were turning around the little one bear, feeding, cleaning, resting, playing. I rediscovered emotions that I thought had been extinct since the death of his wife. Tenderness, purpose, hope. But that peace was just discovered was threatened. A neighbor, upon learning of the animal's presence by chance, alerted the authorities. Soon, a wildlife department agent appeared in the door, with warnings legal and a stern look. Aiden understood in that moment that your time with Baxter was about to end, and that holding on to him could cost you very expensive for both of them. Agent's visit was brief, but forceful. He explained to Aiden that, although his intention seemed good, I was committing a serious offense by detaining a wild animal. He warned him that if he did not hand over the cub immediately, they could accuse him of obstruction and negligence. Aiden didn't argue. He just nodded, in silence, feeling something inside him break. That night, he couldn't sleep. Baxter snored peacefully by the stove, unaware that his world was about to change again. Outside, the mother bear didn't appear. For the first time in weeks, he didn't occupy his usual place. Aiden felt a mixture of strange abandonment and understanding. Maybe she also. I knew that the moment of the separation was approaching. Maybe there was accepted before him. At dawn, with his heart shrunken, Aiden wrapped Baxter in the same blanket from the first day, prepared a box with some fruits, and it placed carefully in his seat from the co-pilot of his old truck. He drove for over an hour, going deep into the deepest part of the forest, along paths that only the hunters knew. Found a silent clearing, surrounded by tall trees and damp moss. There he stopped. He opened the door of the vehicle and carried Baxter to the center of the clearing. There was no signs from the mother, but something he said he wouldn't be long. He placed the bear cub on a flat rock, stroked for the last time behind the ear, and sat a few feet away, waiting. Only a few minutes passed before the vegetation creaked softly. The mother appeared between the trees, thinner, more tired, but still imposing. She approached slowly, without looking at Aiden, and sniffed at his breeding tenderly. Baxter moaned, recognizing her. In that moment, without prior notice, he ran toward her and rubbed against his chest. It was so when the bear raised the view, looked at Aiden directly and, with a minimal gesture, bowed the head. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a gratitude. Aiden remained over there a little while longer, watching how the mother and cubs slowly moved into the forest, disappearing among the trees as if they were part of them. The clearing was silently, except for the occasional creaking of a branch and the distant call of a bird. When he finally climbed back into his truck, he felt a strange weight in the chest, as if there were left a part of himself same in that place. Upon arriving at his cabin, everything seemed emptier. The corner where Baxter slept, the bitten sock next to the stove, the footprints in the floor. Everything spoke of an absence that hurt more than it was willing to admit. For days, avoided looking towards the forest, as if afraid to see the bear watching it once more, or worse still, never see her. Again, passed. Life resumed its slow and silent pace. Aiden, he wrote again, although the words, they no longer flowed like before. Everything seemed trivial in comparison with what he had experienced. Baxter's story occupied every corner of his mind, but he didn't dare put it on paper, as if doing so would mean closing it forever. It was then, one October morning, when it saw, about him porch, right in his same place where the bear there was left to his son, there was a little one, offering a pile of wild berries, arranged carefully. Aiden didn't need explanations. He knew, without a doubt, who the there was left. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a gesture, a way of saying, we're still here, we remember you. From that day, every autumn, new gifts appeared. Pine cones, stones bright, strange branches. The connection hadn't been broken. It had just changed shape, the winters. They were tough again in the Adirondack, but Aiden no longer felt of the same way. Every blizzard, every creak in the snow, brought back memories of Baxter and his mother. There was something comforting in knowing that, in some corner from the forest, that one family was still alive. She never saw them again, at least not directly, but sometimes found fresh footprints near the cabin or listened soft movements among the bushes. It was no longer fear what I felt, but a kind of reverence. I had been part of something wild and sacred. I didn't had searched, but had been granted. In the nearest village, people began to talk. Some they called him the crazy one, Bear. Others it admired in silence. Aiden wasn't bothered to correct anyone. The truth was his, intimate, unrepeatable. One day, a young and enthusiastic local journalist touched his door with a notebook in the hand and eyes full of curiosity. I wanted to write about him, about his life as a hermit, about the rumors of the bear cub. Aiden hesitated. Part of him I wanted to save that one I remember only for myself same, but another part, wiser and less hurt, understood that some stories needed to be told. He invited her in, served tea hot, and for hours shared every detail. The tomorrow of the eye meet, the Baxter's weak breathing, the look on her face bare, the farewell in the clearing. The young woman did not interrupt. She just nodded, moved. When finished, Aiden felt lighter. That history, which had carried like a weight in the soul, now floated in the air, free, and for the first time in a lot time, thought that maybe he wasn't as alone as I thought. The story was published in the local newspaper under the title, "The Man Who Cared a Bear." It didn't take long and go viral, first in the county, then across the state. Soon letters, messages, even visits began to arrive. People who had lost something, who had felt a connection with the nature which simply needed believe that still was left goodness in the world. Some, they carried gifts, others only words. Aiden the received with patience, even though inside he felt that none of it was really for him. It was for Baxter. He had been the bridge, but love was towards that bear cub who fought to live and towards the mother who trusted in a strange. The house stopped being a refuge of silence and became in a place of meeting, of conversation, of inspiration. Aiden, I was beginning to understand that what I had experienced was not just a personal chapter, but a story that belonged to many. One afternoon, a group of children from a rural school arrived in excursion, accompanied by their teacher. They wanted to meet the friend of the bears. Aiden, with a mixture of shame and pride, received in his porch. They showed the blanket he used with Baxter, the corner where I slept, the wooden box where he kept the offerings annual. Children, they listened with the eyes bright, as if it were a magic tale. One of them, the smallest, approached timidly and handed over a drawing. A baby bear hugging a white-bearded man. Aiden broke down inside but smiled. That simple, clumsy piece of paper was a summary perfect of what I had experienced, hung up in the wall, next to the frame of an old photo of his wife, as if they both belonged to the same part of your heart. With he passed of the time, Aiden. He started writing again, but it was no longer articles or essays. They were memoirs. Entire chapters were dedicated to the smallest details, the Baxter's paw trembling when woke up for the first time, the warmth of his body under the blanket, the serene expression of the bear when they met again. He wrote without hurry, like someone walking through a path known but sacred. I had no intention of publishing anything, at least not at first. I just wanted leave proof of what had changed his life. However, someone leaked fragments of the manuscript and a major publishing house published it. Contacted. They wanted to transform their history in a book. Aiden hesitated. He didn't like fame nor the reflectors, but something he said that if that story reached more people, it could touch more lives. He accepted with one condition, that the title was simple and direct, called Baxter. The book was an unexpected success. It wasn't a sophisticated literary work or an epic adventure. It was a true story, told with honesty and tenderness. The reviews they described it as an ode to the compassion, a caress to the soul. People from all over the country began writing to him, sending him pictures of bears, children's drawings, even their own accounts of encounters with animals. Aiden, I read every letter and many times cried in silence. There was past being a broken man to become, without look for it, in a symbol of something bigger, the possibility of healing through another, even if that one another is a wild creature. The publisher asked him to do a book tour, but Aiden refused. He didn't want to scenarios nor interviews in television. His place remained being the forest, although now that forest is no longer there, lived alone. One spring day, while collected firewood near a brook, Aiden saw something that leapt without breath. A few meters away, among the bushes, a young black bear I watched. It wasn't as big as its mother, but it wasn't as big either. A bear cub. He had a fur bright and a confident, if curious, posture. His eyes were dark, but soft. Aiden stayed motionless, not knowing whether to back away or speak. The animal didn't move. It just bowed the head, as if recognizing it. It was so when Aiden it knew. It was Baxter. He had no tests, but it was that same silent bond, that same serene energy. They didn't come closer. There was no contact. They just looked at each other for a long time, and then he bear turned and went inside again in the forest. Aiden stayed there, with the trembling hands and the heart about to burst. That vision, it was enough. It was the confirmation that it had all been worth it. Since then day, Aiden began to leave food not only in autumn, but also throughout the year. Apples, honey, nuts. It wasn't to be tamed, nor to be attracted. It was an act of affection, a way of saying, here, I'm here if you need anything. Sometimes the food disappeared during the night, sometimes not. It didn't matter. The gesture was enough. The connection was still alive, although invisible. The forest became his, again home, but it was no longer the refuge of a man who was running away of the world, but the sacred space of someone who had learned to reconcile with life. Books. They sold. The letters arrived. But nothing mattered as much as that fleeting moment by the stream, when learned that Baxter had survived, that he had grown, that still it remembered. The years followed its course with a new calm. Aiden no longer counted. The days neither scored he passing of the seasons as usual, do it at the beginning of his retirement. Now he measured a time for silent visits, unexpected gifts on the porch, or the footprints that appeared after a rainy night. There was built a small shelf near the fireplace where he placed each object that appeared: a red stone in the shape of a heart, a spiral-shaped branch, a pine cone perfectly symmetrical. Each one had their place, as if they were treasures. He called them the gifts of the jungle. He didn't need more than that to feel accompanied when someone it visited used to tell them the history of each piece, with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. For Aiden, those objects were living proof of a love that did not require words. One summer morning, while I was preparing coffee, a noise in the window it did startle. A crow had crashed into the glass and fallen to the ground. Stunned, Aiden came out quickly. It picked up carefully and placed on a towel in the table of the porch. The bird was breathing but not moving. Aiden, you gave water. It covered with a rag and stayed there, accompanying him, just as there was made with Baxter. For hours nothing happened. But at dusk the raven shook wings, slowly sat up, and without further ado he raised flight and disappeared in the sky. Aiden smiled. There was something in that scene that it looked familiar, as if life will remind you that your role is not to hold back, but to accompany, to heal, to protect, to let go. That was done once, and perhaps without look for it, I would do it again many times more. The experience with He Raven frame a new chapter in Aiden's life. It wasn't a radical change, but an opening. He began to pay more attention to the animals that surrounded his cabin, not as elements of the landscape, but as neighbors, even as visitors. A wounded fox appeared weeks later, dragging a hind leg. Aiden the observed from the distance for days without intervene. He only left food and water near the place where he was sheltering. With time, the fox began to walk better. and one night disappeared without leave or trace. That pattern was repeated with a raccoon, then with a deer young trapped on a fence. Aiden wasn't looking for the animals, but when they arrived, I knew that to do, and every farewell filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. His home had become, without want, in a transit shelter, a relief station in half forest. One afternoon, returning from a long walk, he found an envelope in the door. It was from the same journalist who had written about him years ago. Inside, there was a handwritten letter and a book with a dedication simple: to Baxter, who taught us to love without fear, and to Aiden, for showing us how. The journalist had become an author, using her experience with he as an impulse to tell others stories of bonds between humans and animals. There were created a little group of storytellers who traveled to schools, hospitals, and community centers sharing stories real about compassion. Aiden felt a knot in the chest. His history had ignited others, as if a silent spark had set fire to a network of sleeping hearts. He didn't need any more recognition. To know that something had flourished from its winter inside was already enough. After reading the letter, Aiden sat down in the porch with the book about the knees, feeling he warm wind. From the sunset, gray's him he face. He looked towards the forest as so many times, hoping perhaps to see a movement between the trees, a silhouette known. Nothing happened that day, but inside him, something moved. For the first time since he left the city, he thought in opening your door beyond the symbolic. He began to write letters to some people who had written in recent years, responding with words simple but genuine. He even considered the idea of giving a small chat in the rural school I had visited before. It wasn't vanity. It was a way of honoring Baxter, of ensuring that his passage through the world was not just a nice memory, but a starting point for more encounters, more connections, more acts of care. The invitation to the school came from the teacher who had visited years ago. This time, the children were new, but the history already the new. They had read the book, drawn scenes, even created a small play in which one child helped a lost bear returns. Home. Aiden attended with his heart pounding, not knowing what to say at the beginning, but when saw the attentive eyes of the children, the sincere smiles, he knew there was no need to prepare long speeches. He just spoke from the heart, with the voice broken by the emotion. He said that sometimes the aid, it comes from where we least expect it, that listening and caring is not just a matter for adults, and that tenderness, although sometimes appear fragile, it may be the most powerful force in the world. When finished, the children, they applauded as if they had seen a hero, but I knew that the true hero there was had 4 legs and a heart immense. After the visit to the school, Aiden returned to his cabin with a different energy. It wasn't euphoria, but a kind of expansive peace, as if finally would have found a purpose that did not move away from his life in the forest, but the integrated. He began to receive visits from small groups, young people naturalists, curious families, even older people looking to reconnect with something they thought was lost. There was no entrance fee or offered tours. I only shared his history, showed the objects he kept, and talked about what he had learned in his loneliness. That the nature is not there to serve us, but to live with us, That links do not always need words. That a gesture, a look, or a silent presence can change everything. That one cabin, which was once a refuge to escape from the world, had become a place to believe again in he. One autumn night, while I was organizing some papers in his desk, heard a soft sound in the door. Upon opening it, he found a familiar figure, the journalist, now with a shorter hair and new wrinkles in the eyes. I was coming without cameras, without notebook, with just a backpack over his shoulder and a genuine smile. I needed to get back, he said. Aiden invited them in, and they spent hours talking by the fire, remembering not only the Baxter story, but everything there was come after. She told as his life had changed after know him, how there was left his work to found a network of storytellers, and how that grid now counted with more than 100 people sharing stories of tenderness and humanity. Aiden the Eye listened with amazement, finally understanding that his little act of compassion there was grown beyond any expectations. What began as a desperate attempt to save a bear cub had transformed into a movement of love. Excite you, like or share it with someone who needs a reminder of what love can do. That visit ignited in Aiden a spark of gratitude he hadn't felt in years. He proposed to the journalist something that he had been wearing time thinking, but that had not yet had the value of verbalizing. He wanted to open his cabin like a small reconnection center with the nature, not a tourist hostel, but a refuge for those who they needed to heal. Like him, it there was done. People who will arrive with wounds invisible, in search of silence, of listening, or simply of a space to breathe deeply again. She accepted, without doubted it, and promised help. You organize everything from logistics to communication with the visitors. Aiden, although somewhat intimidated by the idea, I felt that was it correct. What was there arrived the moment of sharing the forest, not only as a landscape, but as a home that he had learned to respect thanks to a bear cub who never asked to be saved, but who changed your life forever. With he. As the months passed, the place began to take shape. They built 2 cabins, small, additional, using materials sustainable and respectful the vegetation of the environment. There was no conventional electricity nor internet connection, only water of the stream, sunlight, and the constant murmur of the forest. The first visitors arrived cautiously, as if they were afraid of disturbing something sacred, but it only took a few hours for them to understand his spirit from the place. Many, they cried when they saw the objects in the bookshelf, or when listening the Baxter story told by Aiden in a low voice in front of the fire. Some, they left their own gifts, letters, stones with messages, small drawings. It was as if that corner of the world would have been transformed into a sanctuary of silent encounters, where tenderness was not announced, but it was permeated everything. And Aiden, now with he, whiter hair and the more measured gestures, he finally felt at home. One winter morning, while reviewed the camera traps he had set up with help from the naturalists, Aiden found an image that lay motionless. In the edge of a clearing, just at dawn, appeared an adult black bear accompanied by a cub. It wasn't a clear image, but Aiden recognized something in the posture, in the manner in which the adult looked at the camera. That one, a mixture of strength and calm that I had only seen once before. Maybe it wasn't Baxter, maybe it was, but the important thing wasn't the certainty, it was the possibility, the hope that the cycle continued, that it sown with love had multiplied. That night, he printed the photo and the hung next to the first offering of berries. He said nothing. He just sat in his wooden armchair with a fire crackling nearby and breathed deep. I felt like everything was in your place. With he passed of the time, the small reconnection center began to be known beyond of the state. People came from other parts of the country, some even from foreigner. They didn't come for luxuries nor comforts. They came for what they had read, for what they had felt when they met the story. Aiden maintained the clear rules, no unnecessary noise, absolute respect for others' animals, and above all, silence in the first moments. You come here to listen, he said always. And it wasn't just the sounds of the forest that he meant, but the heart that we so often ignore. Some visitors stayed for a few days, others just a few hours, but everyone left differently, with a softer look, passed slower, or a decision made that they had been putting off. It was as if that place, hidden among the pines, had the power to reveal the essential. One spring afternoon, Aiden received a woman's visit, older woman who was traveling alone. She was walking with cane, but he had a steady gaze. When he arrived, he did not ask explanations, neither accommodation. He just sat down in his porch and said, "What I dreamed, this place, the bear, you." Aiden used to all kinds of people, was surprised by the serenity with the one who spoke. She offered him tea and they listened for hours. The woman He said that he had lost his son toward years, and that since then, in her dreams, she saw a bear cub that led through the woods to a wooden cabin. While reading his book by chance, he knew it was no coincidence. He traveled there without expectations, just with the intuition that he would find something he needed. As he said goodbye, he left a letter. She was grateful not only for the hospitality, but the space that you allowed cry for the first time without guilt. You gave me back something I didn't know I was missing, she wrote. Aiden saved that letter along with the others, in a metal box under his bed. Not the I read with frequency, but I knew they were there, like silent reminders of everything that had changed. Sometimes he wondered that would have become of him if that tomorrow there would be no open the door, if I had closed the eyes, if the fear had won, but not did. And that little act of bravery, it had transformed, not just him, many people, even animals that weren't not even I knew. Compassion, I understood now. It was a seed, unpredictable. You never know where will blossom, nor who it will touch. And although she never hugged Baxter again, he saw his mother up close again. He felt that they were alive in every gesture, in every visitor who arrived in silence and left with the lightest soul. One of the most unexpected visits occurred in the middle of summer. A young man, veterinarian, recently graduated, arrived with a backpack, a notebook, and an expression nervous. There was read about the Aiden's story during his studies, and what considered an example of what animal medicine also it could be. A delivery that is not always I needed instruments, but yes, a lot humanity. He asked him permission to stay for a few days, not as a tourist, but as an apprentice. Aiden. He hesitated at first. He didn't see himself as a master of none. But something in the look of the young, you remembered his younger, curious, and impulsive version. He agreed. For that week, they walked together through the woods, checked out the camera traps, they left food in the points regulars, and observed in silence the signs of the environment. The young man toward many questions. Aiden doesn't always had answers, but shared what I had learned. To listen with his body, to trust in the instinct, to leave space. When saying goodbye, the young you gift a little notebook with notes from your experience in the place. In the last page had a drawing, a man with a beard sitting next to a bear, both looking at the stars. Aiden it saved with a smile. I was beginning to notice that, without search for it, it had become a part of the other people's imagination, a symbol perhaps, but he didn't feel any different. He continued being his same man who once picked up a dying bear cub without have idea of what I was doing. The difference was that now I knew that act there was invisible thread fabric with hundreds of lives. In the silences of the cabin, among the song of the birds and the creaking of the wood old, Aiden thought in how something so simple, open a door, say yes, trust, can change not just one destiny but many. One foggy morning, Aiden woke up with a pain strange in the chest. It wasn't physical. It was like a dense nostalgia, as if his body knew something that his mind had not yet understood. He walked to the clearing where he had first seen Baxter off. The moss was damp, and the air smelled of wet earth. He sat down on a stone and closed the eyes. He remembered every detail, the look in the bear, the body warmth of the bear cub. And to his weak breathing, the silence that followed. He felt that this place was his origin, but also your destiny. There was started his transformation, and there wanted to finish his history, even if I didn't know it when neither how. Upon returning to the cabin, found on the porch a braided branch in the shape of a circle. It was delicate, almost impossible to have been formed by chance. Aiden picked up carefully and wisely, without doubt that someone or something there was left there for him. He placed the branch in the center of your shelf on a smooth stone that had given away a child on one of his visits. He contemplated her in silence, with a feeling of fullness that I had not felt in a long time. I no longer needed evidence that your history there was made sense. It felt in every object, in every letter, in every visitor who passed by his door looking for answers or comfort. And above all, felt in its interior. It was not the same man who had arrived at those mountains, broken by the loss and worn out by the loneliness. Now he was someone who had learned to look with others' eyes, to live with karma, to love unconditionally. Aiden didn't know how much I would live longer in that cabin, but yes, I knew that as long as I breathed, I would continue opening his door, because I understood that sometimes the bravest thing one can do is to receive. With the passage of the years, Aiden began to write a second book. It wasn't a sequel direct from Baxter, but a compilation of stories experienced in his refuge. The animals that passed by, the people who healed, the silences that spoke more than any word. They're called the porch, because according to him, everything important happened there. It was the point of entry, of waiting, of farewell. Each story was counted with the same simplicity with the one who lived, without unnecessary decorations, without drama. Only the naked truth of what was lived. When the book was published, it received less media attention than the first, but that doesn't imported. The letters continued arriving. Some were from readers who had been in the cabin and they recognized each other in the stories. Others from people who dreamed with visit her someday. Aiden. He responded to all of them with a phrase that became in his signature, "Here we are. The forest is waiting for you too." One afternoon, while sweep dry leaves of the porch, Aiden felt a crunching behind him. It wasn't just any sound, it was a firm, heavy, familiar step. He turned slowly, and a few meters among the trees saw an imposing figure, an adult bear, large with her fur bright and serene look. He didn't move, he just watched. Aiden, with his heart tight, gave a pass toward forward. There was no need for more. The bear bowed the head slightly, and after a few eternal seconds, it was realized Average turned around and disappeared in the forest. Aiden didn't cry, he smiled, because he knew he didn't need to, tests, nor names, nor certainties. In that minimal gesture, in that fleeting encounter, felt a farewell, one that didn't hurt because it was full of gratitude. I had closed a cycle and there was made of the better way, in peace. After that, Aiden began to prepare everything for when he was no longer there, not because felt that the end was near, but because he understood that truly valuable things must continue to exist beyond who the started. He wrote letters, organized his notes, left clear instructions for the shelter could continue operating. The journalist, now a close friend, agreed take charge from the place when I could no longer do it. Even a group of former visitors volunteered to maintain the spirit of the site, take care of the land, receive those who will arrive, respect silence, protect the animals. Aiden didn't have children, but seeing that commitment, he understood that there was created something that transcended the blood and the surname, a family of kindred spirits, a legacy without name. No longer worried what was to come, there was planted enough tenderness in the world as if to sleep in peace. 1 year after, on the first day of autumn, a small celebration was held ceremony in the clearing. It wasn't a funeral or a farewell. It was a tribute to the story that everything had changed. Aiden still was there, sitting in his wooden armchair, with a blanket over the legs and a calm look. The journalist read excerpts from her book, The Children They Planted Seeds Around of the Place, and one of the volunteers let a drawing of a bear on the stone that marked the site where Baxter was delivered to the forest. There were no long speeches, just heartfelt gestures. At the end of the day, when everyone had left, Aiden, he walked alone to the porch, sat down with difficulty, and observed the forest that now you spoke without words. I understood every creak, every shadow, every silence. I didn't need any more adventures or more stories. I already had lived through everything and had shared well. The days following, they were calm, almost detainees in heat time. Aiden was passing by the mornings watching the forest from his porch, and afternoons writing little notes, loose thoughts that I left in a notebook that he titled, "For Whom Come Afterward." They were not instructions nor deep reflections. They were simple observations. The squirrel that appears at dawn prefers the nuts that come from the east. If you listen 3 times the song of the owl, prepare for rain. There are silences that should not be interrupted. It was his way of telling the future that life went on, in the details. The volunteers, they came every so often, they brought food, they talked with it, helped with the tasks of the place. Aiden didn't ask for anything, but he was grateful for everything. His body was slower, his back more hunched, but his mind was an illuminated forest. Sometimes he laughed alone, remembering Baxter's clumsiness when he crashed into the furniture, or the impatient gaze of the mother bear in that first meeting. One night, with the moon full bathing the clearing in silver, Aiden woke up with a feeling strange, not from pain, not of urgency, but of certainty. He stood up slowly. He covered himself with his blanket and walked to the stone where there was left Baxter so many years ago. The forest was in total silence, as if even the trees contained the breathing. He sat down on the rock, closed the eyes, and took a deep breath. In his mind appeared faces, scenes, sounds. His wife, the first winter in loneliness, the weak puppy in her arms, the letters, the children, the hugs, the bears. Everything was there, complete. Opened the eyes for the last time, and in the distance, he thought he saw a black silhouette among the trees. I didn't know if it was real or... I remember, but it didn't matter. He smiled with tenderness, and there, in the immensity of the forest that he had loved so much, he let go of the breath with peace. Aiden was found at dawn by one of the volunteers who came to bring him bread and honey. He was sitting, with his body relaxed and the eyes closed, as if he had simply fallen asleep. There was no crying immediate, no shouts, just deep respect. The young man knelt silently. He took the hand, and then he returned to the shelter to warn the others. That day, everything stopped. Nobody worked, nobody cooked, he spoke more than necessary. They prepared body carefully. They placed the notebook "For Whom Come After" and wrapped in the same blanket that once covered Baxter. There was no traditional burial. Aiden there was made it clear that he wanted to be part of the forest. So they took them to the clearing, to the same place where he handed over the bear cub, and there they fired with soft songs, symbolic stones and wildflowers. There was no coffin, only earth roots and a life returning to its origins. The years passed, but the Aiden's spirit continued to be present in every corner of the shelter. The visitors continued arriving, many without knowing exactly that were searching, but as they left, everyone knew they had found something. Some, they said, having felt a presence near the porch. Others, they assured, have heard a deep breath as we crossed the clearing. Offerings continued appearing. Braided branches, neatly arranged berries, stones willing in circles. Nobody played those objects. They were sacred. The journalist, now in charge of the place, kept Aiden's memory alive, with readings weekly of his texts and walks guided to the clearing. But the most important thing was not the story they told, but the way they told it. They lived. Every gesture of care, every respected silence, every shared tear spoke of the invisible legacy of that one man who learned to love without expecting anything in return, and who taught everyone that tenderness also leaves fingerprint. One spring afternoon, a child arrived at the shelter with his parents. He was shy, hardly spoke, and seemed to carry a pain very large in his little body. The journalist received with the same sweetness with the one that Aiden used to do it, and let him explore at his own pace. The child, he walked alone to the porch, sat down in the same armchair where Aiden there was so many hours passed, and he stood looking at the forest in silence. The next day found the rack with the objects, the stone heart, shaped, the spiral branch, the pineapple perfect, didn't ask that were, only the noticed with respect, as if I understood. On the third day drew a bear, and it let in the stone from the clearing, just as they had made the children in he passed. Nobody you taught that, simply it felt. His parents, excited, said that it was the first time that your son expressed something from the death of his brother. The forest once again had spoken. If you got this far, maybe also take something of this story with you. Let it in the comments. That child returned all the years old. As he grew up, he became involuntary, then into a caregiver, and later into a storyteller. He learned every story, every corner, every lesson that Aiden there was left between the lines. One day, many years afterward, it was he who wrote the new edition from the book Baxter, adding a final chapter, The Porch Go On Open. In he recounted as the story of a man lonely and a bear cub had changed the lives of hundreds, including his. He was not looking for fame or recognition. I just wanted to make sure that no one forgot. And while it wrote, in the same table as Aiden scored his first memories, the young looked out the window and smiled. Because there, at the edge of the woods, a dark, serene figure it observed silently. A bear, maybe a descendant, or perhaps simply life giving it to him the thanks once again. With he passed of the time, the refuge became in more than a place. It was a symbol, a living promise that the goodness could flourish in half of the pain, that opening a door, even with fear, it could be the bravest act of the world. The generations passed by, but the essence remained. Listen, care, let go, families whole. They arrived telling how the Aiden story had healed wounds that no one else could touch. Some they brought objects to add to the bookshelf, others they just stayed in silence by the fire. But all, without exception, they brought something back in his heart. Because that one corner of the Adirondack did not offer answers, but spaces for each one to find the yours. And in that space, the memory of a bear called Baxter, and of a man who dared to feel continued beating, soft and firm, like a whisper among the trees. The young man, who once was child, became with the years in a new guardian of the place, not by inheritance, but by choice. He knew that his mission was not to replace Aiden, but to continue the conversation that he had started with the forest. He took care of a porch, kept alive the tradition of objects, and above all, preserved silence. It taught us to listen, like Aiden you taught him. One night, as he closed the windows, he found a braided branch in the shape of a heart on the threshold. Not the touched, only the looked and understood. The cycle continued, and while had someone willing to listen, to care, and to open the door without fear, the Aiden Brody's story never would end, because it wasn't a story about a bear. It was about us, about what we can be when we let love guide us, even in the deepest part of the forest. You believe in signs that do not need words. This story deserves to be heard today, when one walks through the path leading to the refuge. You can feel the air change. It's not just the freshness of the pines or the murmur of the leaves. It is something deeper, more subtle, a presence that envelops, that accompanies. There are visitors who claim have dreamed with the place before knowing it, others who say they feel hugs without arms or whispers voiceless. No one mocks, no one it questions, because everyone, in some way, they understand that there is something sacred in that corner of the world, an echo of compassion that transcends time and the language, a story woven with simple and brave acts, such as warming up a bear cub, look at a bear at the eyes, or leave berries on a porch. Every step in his shelter is a tribute to what Aiden it was, and what we all could be if we listened more with his heart. And so, Aiden Brody's legacy continues, not as a statue, not as a name in a history book, but as a fire that does not go out, lives in the shared silences, in the hugs without words, in the hands that heal without promising, in the porches that follow open. Because that was his elderly teaching, that the true greatness is not in changing the world with strength, but in touching a life with tenderness, just one, like him did with Baxter. as the forest did with he, and as long as there is someone willing to stop, look and care unconditionally, story will continue to grow, leaf by leaf, heart by heart, because true love, when offered without expecting anything, it has no end, only roots. If this story touched you, help us keep growing. Share it, comment, or simply leave the porch of your heart open.